Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders at the sharp edge of strategy. Normally, once again, we are back with a news roundup this week. It's a new format we're experimenting with. We would love to hear your opinions on how this is working out. So please do let us know. It is not replacing our normal, regularly scheduled programming of interviewing IT leaders. But this week, you have Penny and I talking about some fairly big news that's affecting the UK and technology. So coming up, we're going to be talking about Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham. We're going to be talking about heat, which is obviously at the top of all of our minds right now. But we're going to start with this big tech stock sell-off that has rocked the world. So Penny, what's happened?
So basically, at the beginning of the week, it started in like the Asia markets, and you essentially had SK Hynix and Samsung, who were kind of like the poster children of the global AI boom. So what happened is that I think there was a report showing that SK Hynix was delaying the conversion of some of its kind of high bandwidth memory production lines that were basically, it was meant to happen by a certain date and it wasn't going to happen by a certain date. And that just seemed to ignite the whole market into kind of panicking. And it really seemed to overreact, and it seemed to then stoke a load of other fears that the whole AI hardware boom was beginning to, well, plateau or slow down. So kind of started in Asian markets, it swept through the European stocks, and then obviously it got to the US. So you had companies like Micron and even Nvidia falling quite significantly. I think Nvidia fell over 4%. So it has kind of like rallied a bit, but it hasn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's everything is still about 20% higher in value than it was at the start of the year. But the fact that there was this big sort of, spooking of the market really is is interesting. And it's interesting that that was the thing that triggered it, because last time something like this happened, it was actually the DeepSeek announcement last January that triggered a bit of a panic. But then obviously, as you know, it recovered fairly quickly soon afterwards.
Whenever you talk about triggering a panic, I picture the wildebeest scene, the stampede in The Lion King, and all the tech stocks just running off the edge of the canyon.
Yeah, with a Scar about to push someone off the top.
Which is an amusing image, but at this point, people's pension funds are tied up in this stuff. So it's not just imaginary money. This actually affects people in the real world.
It is real money. And actually underlying it, even though it was a very big kind of panicky reaction, there is a lot of logic to fears that the whole thing is kind of wildly overvalued in the first place. So, I mean, when you look at the capex of, the combined, I made some notes before we started, the combined capex of Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta this year, it's like they're projected to top something like $452 billion. It's absolutely crackers. So you've got hyperscalers, and they're obviously building out these massive data centers, mainly for OpenAI and Anthropic. But at the same time, investors are looking at those ratios between capex and the free cash flows. And there does seem to be a sort of dawning realization that it's going to take everyone a lot longer than we thought to make money out of this.
Yeah, we've seen, especially in the last month or two, there's a real focus now on what's being called tokenomics. So lots of companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are raising the prices of tokens because I think they've realized, hey, we're not making any money out of this AI that we're developing either. And then agents are a compounding force on top of that because they act semi-autonomously, and it's impossible to predict how many tokens each of those will consume in a given query.
I'm going to interrupt you.
And
Sorry.
then,
Right, go on. Are you going to tell me about the thing I was going to ask you to tell me about, which was looping, which I've been hearing
yes,
about?
I was going to talk about this looping
Okay.
thing. So LLMs are basically querying themselves and going round and round in a circle and consuming potentially infinite numbers of tokens.
Which is great
So
if you're paying for them, less so if you're not.
yeah, well, if you're being paid for them,
yes, that's
yeah, but less so if you're the one actually doing the paying. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I was at Google Cloud Summit earlier this month, and they have a new model that they say avoids the looping issue. So it's possible that the tech will just develop and this won't develop into this sort of big, full-blown, at-scale problem. But it's unfortunate to say, but time will tell, basically. At the moment, this is an issue that affects a lot of different LLMs, a lot of models, a lot of companies. So yeah, you just have to be very, very careful and very controlled about your spend. And that's actually something else that came up at Cloud Summit. There was a big customer panel, and I talked to some of the CIOs and CTOs who were there. They talked about tech change, but specifically cultural change in how they are controlling their spend. They've got this shift left mindset for finance, so FinOps or AI ops, whatever you want to call it. So even engineers get a more of a product mindset. They realize what each query they do is costing the company, which is very, is to be applauded.
That's
Uh,
perfectly sensible. You just think it's actually, I, I don't know. I just think the LLM thing has got so mad that we've almost become conditioned to thinking that it's okay to do it any other way. And it's like, if you're a business, and obviously the goal is to make money, I would have thought the best place to focus a tech budget would be on something that, well, either solves an immediate problem, it generates revenue, or it cuts your costs.
you don't want to be the one left standing in the dust when everyone else is racing ahead, having scaled and productized AI, do you?
No. But then,
So
yeah, but this is it, and this is but we're back to the argument of this all being fueled by FOMO and vibes, aren't we?
yeah, FOMO and vibes are,
Yeah.
well, they're fueling the tech industry, at least the AI boom at the moment.
Yeah.
But coming back to this big tech stock sell-off, we've talked before about how the NASDAQ, the US sort of stock index, is really exposed to AI because
Ooh.
the Magnificent Seven, so just 7 big companies,
Yep.
represent about a third of the value of the NASDAQ, which is
Mhm.
like, I don't know, 100 companies, something like that.
Well, the whole
But
thing between this sell-off at the beginning of the week, it took, I think, just over 2% off the NASDAQ as a whole.
yeah, but the Kospi, which is the South Korean index, is even more exposed because Samsung and SK Hynix represent
Basically is.
half the value of that index.
Yeah.
Hence, a relatively small change in stock price. Well, it's not relatively small. It was 12%, which is actually it's pretty stonking. But that happening at just 2 companies knocked off a huge amount of money off the South Korean index. So, we're seeing this big knock-on effect. And then, as you say, it rolled out across Asia, spread to Europe, and then spooked the American markets as well.
And also feeding into the American markets, you've got the fact that, obviously because inflation has been somewhat problematic in the US this year, the odds of the Fed raising interest rates before the end of the year is now, I think, is like, I don't know, somewhere between 60 and 80% more likely. So of course that makes debt more expensive, and this is all fueled by debt. So that's also a problem.
Absolutely. Companies are going into debt to fuel expansion, to fuel their AI investment. And if debt gets more expensive, then that's a problem for them. And this is something that the chair of the Fed did say that he was intending to do last week. So, yeah, I can't see the US getting out of this year with interest rates staying at their current level.
No. And but we've seen as well, haven't we? Like, but I mean, it was even happening earlier on this year, like the last sort of quarterly batch of earnings calls, when Meta, especially when it announced that it was spending more on its crazy capex guidance was 125 to 145 billion. It's just numbers at this point, isn't it? Its share price didn't go up. The days where you could just say, yeah, we're spending billions and billions of dollars and firing lots of people, and your share price just automatically goes up as a consequence. That relationship isn't happening anymore.
We're long past those days.
We have.
We're also long past the days where just saying AI in a press release jumped your stock price 3%.
Yeah.
So people, especially IT leaders, are now focusing more on outcomes and ROI. So we're very much past the F around phase. We're now in the find out phase for AI. Right. I think that's about all the time we have to spend on the tech stocks part. Although perhaps we should also mention SpaceX, which has plummeted. Everything what goes up must come down. And like
Rocketing
one of
up
its own
and
rockets.
floating back down to earth. Yes, no, not
Yeah.
in pieces. And no, I will stop with that analogy. But yeah, I mean that was inevitable, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
again, I think we covered this last week. It was ridiculously overvalued. It was purely driven by hype, and of course, it has calmed down this week. But it will be retail investors left holding the bag.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Institutional investors have, as predicted, made bank.
Yeah.
Retail investors, that's people like you and I,
Not
have
me.
lost out.
I would like to point out, not me. But
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so the other big news, or not news so much as a situation, is it's really hot.
No.
In case anyone here hasn't noticed, I mean, I'm sitting here with top button undone and 2 fans on me.
Yeah.
It's very, very hot. This is obviously going to get more common. We've been saying this every year for like 5 or 6 years now. We're seeing the temperature approaching and exceeding 40 degrees here in the UK. Climate change is real, folks. But the big news for us in the tech market is what does that mean for infrastructure like data centers? Penny.
Yeah, so earlier, there were two sort of separate events, but they are connected. So last week, Amazon decided to publish how much water it uses long term. Um, from its data centers, which it had always held off doing. It had always published a metric called water usage efficiency, which is essentially like how many liters of water. Well, it's not how many liters; it's what fraction of a liter of water does it take to generate 1 kilowatt of electricity, kilowatt hour of electricity. And so they've always published that because obviously it looks quite good for them. The absolute water use did not look quite so great for them, but they did finally publish it. And it is somewhere in the region of 2.5 billion gallons, which is, I'm just trying to convert that for you as we speak into megaliters, which is kind of what the other cloud companies provide that figure in. So yes, Amazon chose to publish this figure, which is 2.5 billion gallons, and Microsoft also published an announcement earlier this week saying that it had reached its water positivity goal, which it had compared to 2030, but it's got there early. Now, by water positivity, what it means that it has globally replenished more than it has consumed via its data centers. So it's basically net water positive globally. So I think what's interesting is the fact that tech companies are clearly deciding to try and get ahead of the criticisms from local communities and the wider sort of public awareness that the water consumption of data centers is a problem. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen these two announcements very close to each other.
But being transparent is all very well. If they're not changing anything, it's not going to change public sentiment just because they've said, hey, yes, we consume a lot of water. That's it. They need to actually do something about it.
Yes, they do, but Amazon sold their announcement they spun it in the sense that, yes, we are consuming 2.5 billion gallons of water every year, but we're doing it really, really efficiently. So that's the spin. It's that, yes, we create all this output, we use all this electricity, but we actually use much less water to cool those data centers than you think. And in Microsoft's case, it's trying to, so again, it's trying to kind of get ahead of the same criticism and say, well, okay, yes, so we have we know that we have issues with local communities, but globally, we've invested in all these global water projects, and actually, overall, we have replenished more water than we have consumed. So yeah, it's a publicity thing, basically. But yeah, Microsoft's had pushback on its data centers in Phoenix, in Iowa, in Wisconsin. They actually backed out of an extension of an existing campus because there was a kind of brouhaha over the impact on Lake Michigan. So, yeah, and Meta. I wrote about Meta earlier this week. It's had its own standoffs over data centers. It's impacting groundwater supplies in a lot of the places where big campuses have been built.
And this is only going to get worse as heat continues rising across the globe.
Yeah, and that doesn't even take into account the whole kind of heat islands thing, which is the impact on temperatures immediately, in the immediate locale of big data center campuses.
it was, I think, 4 years ago, 2022, Google, I remember, had to switch off one of their London data centers because of the heat, because it
Doesn't
hit
surprise me
nearly
at all.
40 degrees.
Oh,
They
yeah.
had like primary and redundant cooling systems failed. That same summer, Oracle had to do the same thing. They experienced some heat-rated failures in data centers. So this is going to become more common.
Yeah, it is.
And the dangerous part of it and the scary part is that that infrastructure is not isolated. It doesn't operate in isolation anymore. In the past, if a rail line went down, okay, that's bad. It only affected people on that particular rail line. Now, if a data center goes down, that could knock out your telephone, your water company, your rail provider, your power. So data centers are integrated so heavily into critical infrastructure. I mean, Labour has been right to classify them as critical infrastructure. So what we really need now is shared real-time data and proactive mitigation for for this rising heat. We did see an announcement from Nvidia this week, actually, going off on a slight tangent about a data center that uses no liquid at all, or no water at all.
Oh,
So
really? No, I haven't seen that. Not.
yeah, that was quite interesting.
Mm.
Although no indication it's actually being used yet, so it's kind of more of a proof of concept. But yeah, could be an interesting one to do. But this is all sort of, again, wait and see, because the industry needs to start moving on this stuff. And as an IT leader, you might be thinking, well, what can I do? Well, you might not be able to do something as extreme as solve climate change, but you can do your part. Look for efficient data center uses, keep data locally where you can.
I think it's about
Um,
asking for the information as well. It's about, when you're putting stuff out to tender, it's about asking the questions. It's about asking potential providers, how much water do they use? How efficiently is, how much thought has been given to the cooling design? How much water do they use overall as an operation? It's all, it, your power when your power as a customer is, it is there.
yeah, and leverage it.
Yeah.
Ask about the Scope 3 emissions, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Right. I mentioned the Labour Party there. They've classified data centres as critical infrastructure. Continuing with the theme of the Labour Party, are we about to crown the king in the
Nicely.
north? Starmer has stepped down. Burnham has entered, from the corner, the left corner, I should say, as a
Mm.
leadership contender.
Well, so far, the only contender. Pretty much everyone else who was making noise and off.
Yeah. So is Burnham going to step into Downing Street uncontested, which would be, we saw it many times with the Tories over the last, the 14 years that they were in power. It was heavily criticised then. I see no reason why we shouldn't heavily criticise the same thing with Labour doing it.
Although there was a competition last time, well, before, when Boris Johnson stepped down, I would just like to remind you of the fact that it was contested, there was a competition, and Liz Truss won it.
Yeah, and look how that turned out.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So maybe Andy Burnham taking over uncontested isn't as bad a thing as we think it could be. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's we both criticised it before, and we should criticise it now.
Absolutely. Okay, so what does this mean for UK tech, Penny?
Probably immediately, not a lot. The only real impact I can see happening straight away is that I suspect there'll be a change in the Department of, sort of culture, media and sport. No, that's not in DSIT, Department of Science and Technology. Liz Kendall is currently tech secretary. She is not part of Burnham's kind of fan club and clique. They've stood against each other in the past. She's not from the same part of the Labour Party that he is from. So I suspect her tenure might be drawing to a close, which I think is actually a bit of a shame, because I think she's been quite good. I think she's certainly been a lot better than Peter Kyle, who preceded her. But, politics is as politics does.
Yeah, my overwhelming memory of Peter Kyle is him coming up on stage at the Google Cloud Summit a few years ago and praising big tech, just at a
Yes,
time when public sentiment was kind of
it
turning
was
against
totally
big tech.
against it.
It
Yeah.
was fairly poorly timed.
Yeah, I can't read the room, Peter, read the room. But now I saw Liz Kendall speak at London Tech Week quite recently, and she impressed me. I thought she was very, very good. She could certainly deliver a speech.
Yeah, and I think, the current Labour government have actually done quite a bit for the tech sector. We've had a big surge in AI investment, so like £6 billion. We've got the AI growth zones, moves on sovereign AI skills training for the general public, and that's just on the artificial intelligence side.
We've now got the AI hardware plan, which was announced at London Tech Week. The 1.1 billion sort of set aside to try and focus on the points of the AI stack where we can actually make a difference as a country.
Yep. There's been data center planning reform.
A lot of our
That's been, maybe not quite
could
so
go
popular
either
with the
way.
public, but
Yeah.
popular with the IT industry. They set up the National Data Library. They've progressed on the digitalization of public services.
Lots of R&D
They've
investment.
lots of R&D investment. We've got the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill in Parliament now, the Online Safety Act, which has been controversial. The under 16 social media ban is an outgoing one.
Yeah.
And of course, Starmer has taken a pretty firm but principled, I would say, stance against big tech and with the US government. So those are things that I think should be applauded. Maybe not all of them, but most of them. So the government has really looked at tech and not just the whiz bang fancy stuff that is so popular with politicians, but things like the National Data Library, digitalization of public services, things like that have been important and necessary. The rollout of modern IT across the NHS as well. Important, necessary, but like boring, not vote winning stuff.
No, I agree, and I think Liz Kendall especially has been very effective because if you sort of cast your mind back a few months when, when Grok, people were using XAI to make disgusting images of women that were then being published on X, via
But
Grok
not
and
just
all the rest
women,
of it.
children as well.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. It's non-consensual pornographic material in any case. And Liz Kendall, essentially, I think she put down an amendment to, I think, a police and crime sentencing bill, or she basically she did something to criminalize the creation of the images as opposed to just the sharing of them, which was a big part of the reason that Ofcom couldn't seem to sort of act to do anything about any of this, and we just had to watch it unfold. So I think she's actually been really effective there. She's also created the Women in Tech Task Force. So, after having, politicians paying lip service for, decades about how we need to get, more diverse representation of our actual population in technology, she has actually taken the next step to doing something about it. It's like, yes, it's a task force, but it's taking on the input of lots of people who have been campaigning for this for years, really do know what they're talking about. And, if she's just kind of they're putting a plan together based on the kind of feedback that they will be giving, then, it's something that I think we can expect to see improve. So, yeah, I'll be sad to see her go, but I think she will.
Yeah. So in terms of expectations, what can we expect from potentially PM Burnham? Is he going to continue a focus on tech? We know that he's more left wing than Starmer, who's been criticized for his centrism. He's not necessarily anti capitalist, but he's been very careful not to be drawn out in his stance on things like tech, foreign policy, defense. Uh, okay, partly because he's the mayor of Manchester, he doesn't have anything to do with those areas, but as a potential PM, he needs to be telling us what he thinks.
Yeah, we don't know anything about what he'd do yet. It could vary. It really could. It makes me chuckle that he's perceived as being more left wing than Starmer, because he is, depending on how young people listening or watching to this may be, he was a minister under Blair. He was quite a high ranking minister under Blair. He's already run for the leadership of the Labour Party, I think, twice, and lost. So, this idea that he's an unreconstructed lefty is misplaced, I think.
Yeah. Um, that all we know right now is that he is more pro regulation. So currently, the UK has a very light touch regulation, especially with things like AI. We know but only thanks to like a single interview that he did with the Times a few months ago, that he is more in favor of a more interventionist stance. But that really is it at the moment. So I hate to say it one more time, but
Once more with fear.
time will tell. And I think that's going to be the title
Yeah.
of this episode.
Yes, I think it will, and I think it has to be. Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
Okay. That is, speaking of time, all the time that we have. So, Penny, thank you for joining me today. Audience, thank you for joining us today. We have plenty more research, news, and analysis over on computing.co.uk. So please do head over there. And we'll have many more interviews with genuine IT leaders, not me or Penny, coming up over the next coming weeks and months. So stay tuned to Control Alt Lead, and we'll see you soon.
Cheerio.